This is Mac OS Ken.
A not so bad quarter for the Mac, messes for iMessage, and taking a look at MetaQuest 3. It is Tuesday, the 10th of October, 2023. I'm Ken Ray, and this is news from Mac OS Ken, brought to you by yours truly and sponsored by American Tech Support. Set up and support for businesses and homes for over 20 years. Find out more at americantechsupport.com. This show is also supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/MacOSKen. When do Mac sales look particularly bad? When the year before looks a whole lot better. We tend to remember 2022 as the year that played havoc with iPhone production. But the first half of last year was having unfun fun with Mac production. Cult of Mac has had a look at new numbers from market tracker IDC. Sizing them up, the cult says Apple shipped 7.2 million Macs in the third quarter of 2023, a whopping 23% decrease from the previous year. But the third quarter of 2022 was one of the best quarters Apple has ever had for a bad reason. That reason, of course, was COVID. The report points out that COVID-related production problems left Apple unable to meet demand for Macs for the first half of 2022. Quoting the cult again, after these production difficulties were cleared up, the company had a huge surge in Mac shipments, which was great for Apple in 2022, but it makes the third quarter of 2023 look bad. The Cult of Mac piece thinks it might be more helpful to look at Mac sales and shipments from the third quarter of 2021 and 2020. 2 years ago this quarter, Apple shipped roughly the same 7.2 million Macs as last quarter. For the third quarter of 2020, the company shipped about 7 million Macs according to IDC. The way the site sees it, barring that 2022 surge, Mac shipments have held their own. Making those Mac shipments look better, sales of Windows machines have not held their own. Comparing IDC numbers for other vendors in similar time frames, Cult of Mac says Lenovo shipments fell roughly 20% last quarter versus the same quarter in 2021. HP shipments fell 27% last quarter versus the same quarter in 2020. Dell shipments fell 15% last quarter versus the same quarter in 2020. And over the same time period, the third quarter of 2020 to the third quarter of 2023, Mac shipments rose 3%, according to the report. Of course, business was buying Windows machines in bulk to bulk up work-from-home efforts in 2020 and 2021. That makes 2020 and 2023 comparisons for Windows vendors about as anomalous as the 22-23 comparison that looks so terrible for the Mac. Whatever the good form of turbulence is, that's apparently what Apple had in the third quarter of 2022. Since 2020, it's basically averaged out to a smooth flight, so argues Cult of Mac. It is a fraught time for iMessage all of a sudden, with word of a PR attack on one side and a regulatory examination on another. We'll start with the public relations push. A piece from Mac Rumors says Samsung is joining Google in its Rich Communication Services, or RCS, push. You probably know what that is, but just in case, the report says RCS is a communication protocol designed by and adopted by Google. Google has been pushing Apple to implement support for RCS, but Apple devices continue to support the older SMS protocol. According to Google, Apple's adherence to SMS is what keeps messages between iMessage and Android users from being encrypted. It also leads to broken group chats, pixelated pictures and videos, and those oh-so-abhorrent green bubbles versus the calm, soothing iMessage blue. I can't imagine why Samsung cares. On second thought, I can't imagine two reasons Samsung might care. One would be if its Android partner, Google, is looking for an added push to its RCS campaign. The The other would be if Sammy's got numbers that show green bubbles actually putting a dent in its sales. Whatever the reason, feels like a waste of money. Ad campaigns from frenemies aren't likely to change Apple's stance. They also seem unlikely to create a lot of iPhone to Android switchers. The more serious issue for iMessage comes compliments of the European Commission. As it had said it would, a piece from 9 to 5 Mac has the European Union's enforcement body looking into whether iMessage is big enough to fall under the rule of Digital Markets Act rules. Citing a Reuters report, the piece says investigators are determining the importance of iMessage versus competing messaging services for Apple. Antitrust regulators are determining the size of Apple's iMessage user base, if business users rely on iMessage for anything specifically, and how iMessage fits into Apple's overall business. Hey, maybe Mr. Softy can distract them. The EC is also eyeing Mr. Softy's Bing, Edge, and Microsoft advertising to decide whether they have to comply with the new DMA regulation. The report says decisions could come for Apple and Microsoft services early in 2024. A day or so after the iPhone 15 line hit the streets, it started hitting the ground. Headlines everywhere said things like, iPhone 14 Pro trounces trashed iPhone 15 Pro in first drop test. That led to other sites saying things like, YouTube drop tests are a terrible indication of iPhone durability. Because that was the basis of the first set of headlines. A few weeks later, make way for precision. A piece from Apple Insider says scientific drop testing shows that iPhone 15 Pro Max glass is no more fragile or more durable than other premium phones. The latest tests the site references were run by Allstate protection plans. Put head-to-head were Google Pixel Fold, Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 5, Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra, and iPhone 15 Pro Max. According to the report, each stood up fine to being 6 feet underwater for 30 minutes, and each took damage falling 6 feet onto a sidewalk. Dropping them screen down, both the iPhone 15 Pro Max and Galaxy S23 Ultra had screens that Xiaomi shattered, rendered unusable, according to Allstate. The other two suffered minor frame damage, corner scuffing, and small screen dents, but still functioned as intended. Drop them on their backs and Xiaomi shattered. All of them this time. According to the report, both the iPhone and S23 Ultra shattered on impact after a single drop. Both still worked, as long as you put a case on them. Otherwise, you'd cut yourself. Of course, the main camera and ultra-wide camera on the iPhone didn't work, with their having been shattered. Drop the two foldy phones on their outer displays, and what do you know? They also broke. The main screens were still fully functional, says the piece, but were only safe to use when the outer screen panel wasn't in contact with the skin. I need to pick out a case. I spent a surprising amount of time Monday reading reviews for Meta Quest 3, the latest VR headset from Facebook parent Meta. And now I have to correct a bunch of stuff I just said. First, Facebook is actually sort of Meta's parent, but not on paper. Second, metaphorically or philosophically, Oculus is actually Meta's parent, but that's kind of angels on the head of a pin stuff. And third, and this one's probably most important, Meta Quest 3 is perhaps more accurately described as an AR/VR headset. Maybe even a mixed reality headset, depending who you ask. Since the Oculus Rift I had for a job 6 years ago, I have not paid a lot of attention to whatever VR offering Facebook has had. With Apple Vision Pro on the way, kind of feel like I have to now. What I picked up from several reviews, Meta Quest 3 is more comfortable than the Meta Quest 2, AR pass-through is much improved, and offering separate screens for each eye rather than splitting the view of one screen offers a more immersive experience. Every review agreed it is a much better experience than its predecessor, so much better that one reviewer wondered whether it renders the twice as expensive MetaQuest Pro redundant. Speaking of price, that proved an interesting part of the reviews I read. MetaQuest 2 was pretty affordable, starting as it did at $300. One review sort of balked at MetaQuest 3's starting price of $500, though, as another review I read pointed out, Apple Vision Pro will cost $3,000 more than Facebook's latest offering. In the minds of many, that might move Meta's $500 cost from being a reasonable price to a downright bargain. At least one review said the obvious, that in terms of hardware, MetaQuest 3 cannot hold a candle to Apple Vision Pro. For $3,000 less, though, holding one of those mini keychain flashlights might do for most. Meta's offerings sound interesting as experiences. That said, doesn't sound like they're offering a platform the way Apple is with spatial computing. Is that a difference in philosophies from the two companies? Or a difference in marketing? One assumes we'll find out in the months and years to come. If you want to read up on it yourself, the reviews I grooved on came from the virtual pages of Upload VR, TechCrunch, Engadget, CNET, and 9to5Mac. Please enjoy. And finally today, Ridley Scott is working on the supercut of his Napoleon epic, cleverly titled Napoleon. A piece from Apple Insider says the film hits theaters next month with a runtime of 2 hours and 38 minutes. But that's only a little over half the story he wants to tell. In an interview with Total Film magazine, highlighted by Games Radar, Scott says he's working on a longer cut. How much longer? I'm no good at math. 4 hours and 10 minutes. Not 4 hours and 10 minutes longer. That's the current runtime of the director's cut. According to Scott, what will happen is we'll screen the theatrical cut first with Sony, and then it has its run. And then the perfect thing is that the director's cut goes to streaming, and we have 4 hours, 10 minutes. Well, it sounds like he's ready. The question is Apple? Well, Scott says, what will happen is, the Apple Insider piece says neither he nor Apple have yet confirmed a signed deal to stream the director's cut. macOS Ken, brought to you by me and sponsored by American Tech Support. Set up and support for businesses and homes for over 20 years. Find out more at americantechsupport.com. This show is also supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/macOSKen. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media. Online at backbeatmedia.com. You can reach me a couple of ways. Info at macosken.com or call 716-780-4080. Until next time, that is news from macOS Ken. I'm Ken Ray.
Ciao.